Hello everyone, Charles Watts here. Welcome back to Inside Arsenal. It is Friday. It's the morning after Arsenal's Champions League draw at Atalanta in Italy. And as you can see, I'm joined by James Benge of CBS Sports, which means we're doing things a little bit differently this week. It's not just your usual reaction show. It is Inside Arsenal extra time in the morning. So a little bit different for you as we head into the weekend. James, how are you getting on, my friend? Are you still sitting there just thinking about how thrilling that Champions League night was last night?
It wasn't even the worst game I saw all week.
Oh wow, what was?
Anyone watching this show that watched Bologna versus Shakhtar Donetsk, an atrocious 0-0, enlivened by a penalty save. So similarities. We'll know that was a dreadful match of football. But this was behind.
Was there a disallowed goal in that?
No, not that I remember.
I could have sworn I looked at my timeline and someone had scored in that game. Well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was a penalty.
There's been so much Champions League football, and obviously at CBS we do kind of want to cover it all. My mind is a bit like jelly this morning, but I'll try and speak about that dreadful Arsenal game. I'll do my best.
Yeah, it wasn't great, was it? It was pretty awful. To be fair, it was not one that's going to live in the memory. It was a good result. It wasn't a good performance. So we're going to talk about that. Obviously, we'll run through the sort of big talking points of the game, give our thoughts on it. You guys have been getting in touch. Give me your sort of immediate thoughts on it as well. So I've pulled some of those together. And of course, we'll also take a look ahead to a huge day at the Etihad on Sunday. Now, you might see, just a slight disclaimer, James getting a little bit sidetracked at about 10 o'clock because I've just been told he's going to be trying to get Franz Ferdinand tickets while we're discussing this at 10 o'clock when they go live. So if you're watching on YouTube and you see him looking in the complete wrong direction, I presume it's because he's desperately joining a queue trying to get himself Franz Ferdinand tickets. So that is the reason. And for all you watching who I'm sure have been really worried about it, I have got Oasis tickets now. I've got them in the ballot. I will be there in September at Wembley. So looking forward to that. Right. I mean, we'll run through the game then last night. Obviously, the big moment was David Raya's penalty save. We'll get to that in the second half. But when you saw the sort of lineup yesterday and what Mikel went with, were you kind of surprised at the lineup, or was it really what you were expecting? I mean, it was just a couple of changes, wasn't there? Jesus came back into the side and Jorginho came into the side, and that was it from the game against Spurs. Was that a surprise to you? Or is that the kind of lineup you were expecting?
I guess you mean Jorginho out of the side, wasn't it? It was Jorginho made way for Rice, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, yes.
Yeah, I think obviously the Rice one expected. I was sort of wondering which of Jorginho and Partey would play at the base of midfield, because I think obviously the fact that Partey came off with an hour shows a substitution with City in mind. Although, let's be frank, even aside from the penalty, I thought he'd been poor enough to merit coming off. I wasn't too shocked. No, other than Jesus, I'd always sort of thought he was sort of need a bit more time before he went from the off. And I think it felt in the game, he's certainly not the only player that this was the case for, but it felt like he probably wasn't in a place where he was good to go and good to start a big game. I thought he was a little bit off, and everyone was, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. I mean, starting lineup wise, I was surprised that Timber started. I have to say, I thought he would be taken outside, given it was his first 90 minutes against Spurs. I was pretty sure that Kivior or maybe Calafiori would come in. So I was surprised at that. And I did, like you, I didn't think Partey would start. Again, coming off back-to-back games with Ghana, then playing the full 90 minutes against Spurs, I figured he probably would come out the side. But the rest of it was as I was expecting. So it was a little bit stronger than I thought it was going to be. Stronger on paper anyway, if you want to call it that. And I did think Arsenal, for those first sort of 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I thought that was their best period of the game. I thought they started pretty well. They were dominating territory. They had themselves a couple of opportunities. I think Saka sort of had one where he curled one wide. I think it was deflected, wasn't it? Went behind from a corner. They had the free kick. Obviously, Gabby Martinelli had that one when he sort of cut inside and put it over. So the chances were there early on, and I was sitting there watching with my dad, and it was like, it's not been a bad start. We've got to take advantage of this and try and score now while we're on top. But just as that first half wore on, the game started to shift a little bit. And I think Atalanta, I don't know if they worked Arsenal out more or they just got over some early game nerves, but they grew into the game. And those chances that we saw at the beginning of the game, we didn't really see them again for the rest of it, did we? Apart from one big moment towards the end.
One shot after the 18th minute, and that's
That
the real worry coming out of this for me. But I mean, you're feeling Ødegaard's absence in every passage of play, in every aspect of the game. I think Atalanta found it a lot easier to play around Arsenal than they might in a sort of press led by Ødegaard. And we've all said that, haven't we? That having that Ødegaard's great skill is he's this number 10 with the work rate of a defensive midfielder. Really missing someone to lead that press and organize it, I felt. And that's how Atalanta kind of went from, I think it was something like 60% possession to Arsenal in that opening 20 minutes to they ended the game on about 54%, passing the ball neatly. And then everything else was exactly what we expected, wasn't it? The play was a bit slow. It was a bit heavy. Everyone seemed to be looking for the guy that would take control of the offense, to sound, without wishing to sound American, but it sort of felt like it needed that Ødegaard style point guard. And that never came. And that maybe is just a function of playing really good teams. I feel like we won't really know just how profound Ødegaard's absence is until what's the game after? What are the games after?
Leicester and then Southampton.
Yeah,
two home games
ones.
2 home games in a row, Leicester, Southampton. I agree. I think they're going to be really interesting sort of barometer of where Arsenal are without Ødegaard against those two teams, more so than again away at Atalanta and obviously away at Manchester City.
I mean, just what Arteta was saying about our identity is built around Ødegaard. I don't disagree with that, but I've not seen a manager, almost any manager that I can think of, talk about one individual player in their team quite like that. I mean, it is a remarkable admission. And I never believe that what managers say in press conferences makes the slightest bit of difference to how their players play. But like, at the very least, it was prophetic. I think you have to agree, don't you?
I've got that quote up here. He says, he's our captain, our biggest players. He's one of the most consistent players in the last 2 or 3 seasons. Our identity is very related to the way he's playing and the way of his behaving. We're going to have to deal with his absence, and that's a great test for the team as well, how capable we are to show maybe a different face. The fact is we have other players and other options that can be very effective. Now, I agree. It looked, watching that game, you were kind of pining for Martin Ødegaard. But just to play devil advocate here, this is the 3rd away game in a row in the Champions League that Arsenal have not scored a goal. They went to Porto, didn't have a shot on target. Ødegaard played that game. And that was a worse attacking performance than it was last night. And then they went to Bayern Munich, and I was looking at the stats. Bayern, there was 8 shots, 3 of them on target. But, I was at that game, and I can't really recall any of those efforts being remotely like a decent opportunity for Arsenal. So in the last 3 away games against Atalanta, Porto and Bayern, yes, there was no Ødegaard yesterday, but it was a very similar away performance in the Champions League, attacking wise, than what we've seen against Porto and Bayern. And Ødegaard was, absolutely in those games, playing for Arsenal. So, is it as easy as saying it's just because Martin Ødegaard wasn't there that they played like that last night, or is it a sort of wider thing that we have to look at when it comes to Arsenal away in the Champions League?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I'm just, as we're speaking, I'm trying to have a look at what it was like in the Europa League back in 2020, 2021. And I remember that was very different times. But Arteta has felt like a manager that in European away football tends to be extremely conservative. Again, easy comparison to make, but it reminds me a little bit of how Pep Guardiola will sometimes kind of roll out teams in away legs to good opponents, and you'll think, you could be a bit more assertive than this. You are the better team. Why are you letting the opposition dictate the tempo? I mean, like, prime examples were the games against Lyon. I think, frankly, even sometimes when they played Real Madrid away, I think City are good enough that they should be more assertive. I do think Arsenal play really conservatively on the road, and in theory, they that worked yesterday, but of course it didn't. If you give away one penalty, I think if you're light on like that one guy that can make the attack run, I do wonder if there's a case to be made for just more players that can create, and you sort of substitute in by committee. And certainly when we come to those games against the likes of Leicester, is there a case to be made for Trossard and Havertz and Jesus as a sort of 2 8s and a 9 or 3 10s, however you work it out in practice. I don't know, but I'd certainly think there is something that is going to make it harder for Arsenal in Europe when the games really matter. If Arteta is just a little bit too cautious, I definitely remember in that Bayern game, it sort of felt like, I mean, it almost felt like they were playing for an away goal in the old era of away goals. And that's got to change because actually, aside from the
Do you
penalty,
think that's Arteta though, or do you think that's the players? Because why? You know, you're away to Bayern Munich in a second leg. You know, Arteta's not going to be saying to the players, you know, because you know you've got a scorer, you're going out basically. So surely that isn't a message from Arteta. And I, you know, watch him on the touchline; he's going mad a lot of the times in terms of when they play the ball backwards and stuff like that. So is that definitely? Do you think something from Arteta, or is that something ingrained more in the players, just a different style of play, and they're not quite used to Champions League football? I don't know. It's like I can't imagine Mikel would be sitting there saying, "Right, don't go forward, don't create opportunities," because that's just not in his makeup. I would say it's completely different to what we see in the Premier League.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, you know, when you said that, I thought spot on. We have to assume that there is some difficulty in adapting to European football because almost every new team in the Champions League faces it, and kind of Arsenal have arrived as one of the 4 or 5 best teams in Europe, and yet they just still don't play like that. And I feel like once you say it, it feels like the most convincing explanation for that would be that they don't have that Premier League style swagger. That they're going to different places. They're kind of adapting to their schedule. Maybe they just don't yet believe themselves what I think we all believe. That would surprise me, but there does have to be some explanation for why Arsenal are just a bit less assertive, a bit more reactive on the road. And I think the idea that the players just aren't quite settled into the rhythm of Champions League football, which is different. And, you know, you see that manifest in things like set pieces. That to me would be a convincing explanation for why they tend to stand like maybe 5 yards deeper and they're a bit less aggressive and energetic. I like that explanation.
You go back to the group stages last season, and it was what Sevilla they hit for 6 at the Emirates. PSV they scored 4 against at the Emirates. Lens Lens was about 6 as well, wasn't it, or something ridiculous?
Absolutely.
And then you know, away from home against Sevilla, I was just looking at they had 4 shots on target in Sevilla. They had 3 shots on target in PSV. They had 6 on target in Lens, but I remember that Lens game as well was quite a disappointing attacking performance. It felt like they went in front through Jesus, didn't they? They had a couple of shots right at the end, like good chances that didn't go in. But yeah, there's clearly there's a very stark difference from the home form to the away form so far in the Champions League. And when you are really struggling to create like they are at the moment, obviously all it takes is one little incident and suddenly you're chasing the game. That's what happened against Porto, obviously, wasn't it? I mean, not chasing the game because the game was lost because someone bends one in the top corner for 25 yards in injury time. There's no time to come back from that. Against Bayern, obviously, it was a really tight game. Bayern edged it because of Kimmich's goal. Last night had, you know, we'll get to it now, in just an unbelievable moment from David Raya to keep the ball out of his net from the double penalty save. You know, had that goes in and Atalanta go 1-0 in front, the way the game was going, it was very tough to see Arsenal coming back and getting themselves back into that game. And you could have been, you know, sitting here this morning talking about a 1-0 defeat rather than, you know, ultimately what was a decent point on the road.
Brilliant save.
Mikel said it was one of the best he's ever seen. And they obviously, I'm sure you're watching the TV coverage like I was, and Robbie Savage sort of changed his opinion, initially saying it was one of the best he's seen, to then sort of going down the Ollie Watkins route and saying it was a bad header, and you know shouldn't have given Raya the opportunity to save it, which I think is right. But I also think from a striker's point of view, in those instances, you just think, get this on target and I've scored a goal, I think, don't you? Rather than risking angling your header and going for a corner, you're just thinking, he is not getting up from this. All I've got to do is head it and I've scored a goal. It was remarkable reactions. Again, so similar to Szczesny's double save. Do you remember that against Dirk Kuyt at Anfield? Way back when, really similar to that. And yeah, I mean, it was just brilliant from David Raya. What a fantastic season he's having.
He's I mean, maybe not at this level, but he's producing something pretty extraordinary on a weekly basis right now. All the more impressive because for all we sort of said negatively about this performance by Arsenal, he didn't have that much to do beforehand. Well, I mean, obviously, except go and chat with Iñaki Kana, which worked out very nicely. He is always so live to these infrequent moments of danger. I think sometimes what Aaron Ramsdale said about him getting distracted and him needing to focus kind of got a little bit blown out of proportion. But the one thing I would say about Raya is he is always alive to that shot that comes after about 30 minutes where he's done next to nothing at all. That's in general terms. Of course, the penalty save. I agree with you. Like, of course, it's a bad header. Like a good header leaves Raya with no chance. But I thought any header would have been in. The penalty save is also out of this world. Really, really good penalty save that he had. He could only get to by doing what he did in gambling before the shot was taken. And then to be up so quickly, yeah, any half decent header would beat him, but also a lot of great goalkeepers would have been beaten by a bad header. They'd have been beaten by the ball sort of deflecting off Retegutti's head. Wonderful. When was the last time we spoke about Raya versus Ramsdale and all that? And actually, maybe the conversation now needs to be, is Raya a sort of top 5 goalkeeper in the world? I'm starting to think he is.
Well, Mikel was asked that question, wasn't he, after the game last night? And he sort of dodged it, said, I don't know, but he's just brilliant for us. But, certainly for me showing this season. I think they talked about his save percentage so far this season. It's up in the 90%. It's like 93% or something from shots faced, which is remarkable.
12 shots faced, 1 conceded, I think. I was looking at and even this year, let me dig this out. We do a team of the week every week. Obviously, what I found very annoying is I had Thibaut Courtois just locked in. He'd had a great game against Stuttgart, and you go like, oh, geez. So it's 26 games, 12 goals conceded. I've lost his save numbers, but I believe for the whole year it's somewhere around 80%, which is remarkable. Really good numbers considering how few shots he faces.
I said it so many times last season that I really genuinely felt that we wouldn't see the best of Raya until Ramsdale had left the club, even though he was clearly number 1 last season and had been installed ahead of Ramsdale. Just that whole situation, Ramsdale still being there and they're still being focused on it. I always felt that for both goalkeepers, we wouldn't see their best until they moved on, because for Ramsdale, whenever he came in, he'd be under so much pressure and we'd see mistakes like we did when he did come into the side. And for Raya, even though he was number 1, just having Ramsdale there and on the bench and knowing that if he makes a mistake, the TV camera flashes to him, all that sort of stuff. I just always felt that once Ramsdale went and that situation was ended, that we would see the best of Raya. And so I'm not overly surprised at the sort of performances he's putting in, although, I mean, it is exceptional what he's doing this season, like genuinely exceptional. Not just the saves, but just his handling, his presence in the box, absolutely everything. He is in top form. I highly doubt you can maintain that sort of level of performance for the season. But what he's doing right now is very, very special. And obviously, it was the big moment in the game yesterday that made it go Arsenal's way. I mean, what did you make of Gabby Martinelli's chance late on, which is basically Arsenal's only chance of the second half, when Sterling played him through and he went through and sort of snatched it there, very similar almost to what he did in the first half when he had that chance again. When he was on the stretch, his balance wasn't great for both chances, was it? He was stretching a little bit and he snatched at it and put it over the bar. I mean, it would have been a complete smash and grab had that gone in and Arsenal got points because of it. But it was in that sort of game when you're not creating much and you're not really looking like scoring, you get an opportunity like that, you do need to take it, or you certainly need to test the goalkeeper. It was a poor finish from a player who's clearly struggling for form in front of goal.
Yeah, funny one. I mean, XG on Opta has it down as almost exactly a 50-50 chance. Like, kind of watching it, it didn't feel like that. Him running away from goal at great speed.
Yeah,
I think the frustration would be that I felt like, and I don't have it in front of me, but I felt like Martinelli could take his time a little bit more, settle himself and set for a good shot. And I think the angle then would have been worse, probably. And I'm not saying it's a cast iron, he has to score this opportunity, but it felt like, to me, a moment that spoke to Martinelli needing, at best, a goal, but maybe just sort of some time on the training field to work on just slowing down a bit more. It feels like in the last I mean, even before he got injured, but certainly since he's come back from injury, everything Martinelli's been doing has been 100 miles an hour. And I think the brilliant Martinelli we saw in 22-23, it was 100 miles an hour and then 5 miles an hour when it came to taking the shots. He could settle himself so well and so quickly. And that side of his game has disappointingly vanished. Everyone will say, and I will keep hammering home, the fact that he gets in these positions is really encouraging. He got in that position against Spurs. He got in that position against Atalanta. But, I do believe that there are going to be moments in your career where the ball feels a bit smaller. You're not taking your time more. I mean, only Arteta and Martinelli know exactly what the right solution to that is. But I do think it, at the very least, sort of necessitates some time on the training pitch to just sort of work on the mechanics of finishing. He feels like someone that isn't taking his time anymore.
Yeah. The thing is, I'm sure that on the training pitch, Declan Rice spoke about it in his post-match interview yesterday, saying that on the pitch he's scoring all the time and stuff. And I'm sure he is doing that, but you get out on the bright lights of an actual match. It's a very different. I mean, we've all been there at all levels of football. I was a pretty average striker during my playing days, and I had plenty. In fact, I had a lot of patches where the ball wasn't going in the net for me. But even at that level, you feel it. You feel under pressure when you miss a few chances and you've gone a few games without scoring, and people are kind of questioning you a little bit, and you do feel it. And when those chances come, you do snatch at it. And when you look at certainly recently, the game against Spurs, obviously, like you said, the chances yesterday, it's exactly what you said. It just feels a bit rushed at the moment. There isn't that sort of slow down and like, right, I'm take my time, and it is just like slash at the ball, get the ball away as quickly as possible in those situations. Like against Tottenham, I'm sure when you look at that, he could have maybe taken another touch, taken it a bit closer to the goal, but it just felt like he was like, I've got to shoot here. And yesterday was a big chance. I agree with you. When I look at it, I don't look down as that as a sitter by any means. He was running away from goal at pace. He wasn't balanced, but I felt the better option there was to maybe take your time a little bit more and just make sure when you do get your shot away, you at least get it on target rather than just rushing the situation. But I think that just comes from a lack of confidence. And ultimately, he's the player getting in those. In the last couple of games, he is the player getting those positions. The others aren't, but he is the one causing some problems and getting themselves into those positions. But yeah, obviously you do absolutely have to take them.
Another game where also his defensive work rate was off the charts. I don't know. I think a lot of fans and writers sort of tend to want to say, oh, well, maybe he's a bit tired and, sort of give a bit more benefit of the doubt because he's working hard defensively. I think it's great that he does so, but got to get the goals as well, Gabby.
You do. I think, and it's going to be pretty clear. I think goals they're not exactly going to be easy to come by for Arsenal, I think, in the next 6 weeks or so. And which kind of, it makes those chances. I saw a really good comment on Twitter the other day, or yesterday after the game. And they were like, the reason why we're all talking about those, Martinelli's misses at the moment is because they're basically the only chances we're getting. If we're getting a lot of other chances, you don't really focus more on that sort of miss. If you're getting 10, 12 chances a game and you're sticking a couple away, you don't really talk about it anywhere near as much. But when you're only creating 2 or 3 chances, they are the big chances. You're not taking them. It's obviously the focal point. You're saying that Salah missed a load of chances against Milan.
Yeah.
But, Liverpool scored 3 goals and you don't really focus on it as much. But for Arsenal right now, they feel extra painful because they are the big chances that are coming in the game. I mean, I was looking at this from Scott Willis on cannonstats.com and looking at the sort of progressive passing yesterday for Arsenal. I mean, it's not great there, is it? Declan Rice leading the way with 4. And this is going to be the issue they're going to face, isn't it? It's like, how do they progress the ball forward and get the ball up to those and get the ball up into that final third in a good position at the moment? And it's a challenge that Mikel's going to have to face. I don't think we're going to see anything really different against Man City on Sunday, but I do look forward to those Leicester and Southampton games. And just I'm really interested by how he's going to sort of solve this issue in Odegaard's absence. It's going to be a really key decision for Arteta to get right.
I mean, the one thing that stands out to me there is in very short space of time, Raheem Sterling ends up with a very high goal probability added passing, which I feel like is a stat that it speaks to some people and not others, but it really felt when he came off the pitch, he added a little bit more zip and a bit more front-footedness to Arsenal's passing. That was really encouraging, because I know we spoke about this last week. I do wonder if the Etihad is calling to him, so to speak, and a start there. He
I don't
can't.
think I've not seen enough from Sterling in his 2 sub appearances to warrant a start. I still think he looks rusty. I think I agree. Obviously, he set up the chance for Martinelli yesterday, but I still think he's some way off being used to how Arsenal play. I think I'm not sure I've seen enough to suggest a start at City for me.
I know what you mean. Good cameos. I was going to say with Calafiori, great cameo.
That was a good cameo.
Really good cameo. But this is that's the equivalent of a sort of nice walk-on part in a movie, and you're now sort of Arsenal are looking for leading actors on the biggest stage of all. You just have, like you say, you just haven't seen enough. It's a real worry. We knew this was going to happen all along, and we said Mikel Arteta needs to get a lot of the key business done early. Sometimes he did, and it just injuries and all that have robbed him of the opportunity to try these players out. Because I mean, that's the other part. Would Marino be helping in this regard? Probably a little bit. I mean, the midfield feels so in construction.
Yeah, I think I was thinking that yesterday about what sort of difference Marino would be making right now. I think there would be a difference. I think he'd certainly be helping with it. It's obviously, it's just the fact you got that injury on top of Odegaard's injury. It's been a pretty cruel blow, I have to say. It's going to take some getting used to, this table, isn't it? I mean, it's like, how small print do you have to get just to fit everyone into a league table? Arsenal very well poised in 16th place there to pounce after the opening weekend
in the mix
of the season. Bayern Munich leading the way. Celtic, heady heights of second for Celtic.
They were brilliant.
Yeah, 5-1, wasn't it? That was the first Champions League win in so long, wasn't it? Or something ridiculous for Celtic, which is mad.
They've got something like 3 in their last 30, and none of them have been 5-1.
No, it's mad considering how strong Celtic used to be at Celtic Park. It used to be such a difficult place to go in the Champions League, didn't it? They're always awful away from home, but Celtic Park, they're always so strong. But yeah, there's the league table ahead of Arsenal's next game. Paris just ahead of them there, who Arsenal obviously are going to be facing next at the Emirates. Right, these are my player ratings that I gave yesterday. Let me know what you think of them. I'm sure everyone's going to jump on and complain. But this is what I gave. Obviously, I gave Raya a 9 as my man of the match. White, I gave 7. Saliba and Gabriel 8. Timber 6. Partey 5. Havertz 7. Rice 6. Saka 5. Jesus and Martinelli 4. What are your thoughts on those for my player ratings?
Tough. Oh, ain't tough on Timber, who I thought started very well, but then I would probably accept faded briefly. Jesus. Yeah, you know what, though? I do agree. I think Rice maybe merits a 7. But yeah, I sort of think that it tells a story, doesn't it? The higher up the pitch you go, the more insipid the performance is. It has to be said.
Yeah, the wing. I mean, Saka just couldn't get in the game at all. I don't think. You didn't see Ben White on the overlap anywhere near as much as usual. Obviously, there's no Odegaard there, which is that triangle's so important, and the partnership that got so key. I thought Havertz again was the sort of standout in terms of the more attacking players on the pitch. Gabriel and Saliba obviously just as good as they always are, and defended their box really, really well. I didn't think Timber played badly. 6 for me is an average score. Thought White was just above it. Raya obviously got boosted up to 9 for the penalty save. It wasn't a good night for Jesus, and he's come in for a lot of criticism, Jesus, afterwards, certainly from fans and people I've seen replying to me on my timeline and stuff like that and in the comments. But to jump into his defence a little bit, I mean, it was a very hard night for an Arsenal striker in that he was getting 0 service whatsoever, and he was just getting long ball after long ball pumped up to him, and he's just not going to be able to do much with that at all. So I don't, as much as I don't, it was not a good night for him, and the mark obviously shows that. In my opinion, I don't think he was given much help whatsoever from those around him.
Agreed. And actually, within that, he created several chances for Arsenal. I think he ends up with 3 chances created. He worked hard, but he looks like a player that's not fit, which he isn't. Again, this is the worry. I've been writing so much about. I feel like I've been thinking a lot about Jesus' fitness, because writing about Martin Odegaard and sort of trying to reassess the narrative that Arsenal don't ever have injuries, it just looks a shadow at the moment of because I think the player that Arsenal bought, you could thump the ball up to him, and yes, he doesn't have Havertz's height, but he was so scrappy that more often than not, the ball would come back to you if you were an Arsenal player. But that feels a long way off.
It does,
I
yeah.
still kind of hope, maybe even believe, maybe all the way to a believe that Arsenal can get there. But it's been a long time now where Jesus has been a shadow of the player he is. And I think Arsenal kind of need to think about how do they adapt, how they play to fit Jesus in, because he's just not going to win those duels like he used to. He doesn't have the bounce, the physicality, and he's not up to pace with top level opponents at the moment.
Yeah, those first 6 months, Jesus, he was just so good, wasn't he? It's just you talking about it there, and you think back to what he was doing, and like you said, just physically everything. He was just in a completely different place to where he is now. You couldn't get the ball off him. Defenders couldn't get a ball off him. He was so strong, just such a live wire, and he does look miles off it. I think with Jesus, he's just been so unfortunate with injuries. Every time he comes back and starts to look quite sharp again, like in the summer in pre-season, again, I thought he looked really sharp early on. He looked fit, he looked healthy, and he picks up another injury and he's out for a few weeks. And when that just keeps happening to you, it's so hard to get any sort of rhythm. And I think he certainly looked like that sort of player yesterday, just a player lacking rhythm and trying to find his way back into the game. We'll go through a few sort of questions and comments now before turning our attention to the City game, where we'll talk about potentially, would Jesus start or other things. John here has got in touch. Says, hi chaps. Well, that was a bit of a non-event from Raya's apart from Raya's superhuman save. I knew it'd be a hard game. Arteta picked a good starting 11, but Atalanta were very organised and stopped us playing our game for a lot of the match. We have what should be easier fixtures to come, and we need to bag the 3 points in those. Do you think Arteta could have played it any differently and got the 3 points against that? Martinelli still shooting blanks. I bet he gets everything in training. Anne says, what can you say about that poor performance? Does anyone other than Ryan deserve a rating above 6 or a 7? Well, I think the centre-backs did. Passing was atrocious. Subs were not productive. It felt like a loss. Lots to improve on for Sunday at City. Disappointing. And the passing was so bad. I mean, literally in that second half, they could not keep the ball for longer than two or three passes. They just couldn't string any sort of thing together.
You gave Ben White a 7, and I tell you, his pass completion stats start with a 7, which is very rare. 72% completion from him.
Really?
Yeah. I know he was in the sort of final third a lot with those passes, but that sort of typifies the game. And it's only 2 games in a row, so I'm not worried. But I'm thinking about Ben White having had a couple of off games in the last week.
No Martin Odegaard.
No, quite possibly.
That triangle on the right-hand side. John said, do you think Arteta could have played it any differently and got the 3 points? Could he have done it? I mean, what else could he have done? I mean, we've got a few questions I could just quickly rattle through to here, and these two both talk about Nwaneri. So I suppose when you're asking, could he have done anything differently? Like John was, maybe the Nwaneri option is a route he could have gone down. I didn't expect it to happen. But obviously, some people, as these two commenters here are suggesting, maybe in Odegaard's absence, Nwaneri is what Arsenal should turn to. Could he have played that game?
Yeah, I think he could have. I think, given that you have 8 Champions League games, and it is almost impossible for a team as good as Arsenal to not at least make the knockout playoff. I think, contrary to everything I almost said about, or compared to everything I said about starting him in the derby, I don't think it would be too much to put on Ranieri for him to start that Champions League game. Equally, the midfield that started of Partey, Rice, and Havertz, sort of midfield, sort of 9, is hardly it's hardly bad players. It's all players that Arsenal spent an awful lot of money on, and that are talented enough. I think I would be a lot more worried about this game if there had been 4 or 5 without Martin Odegaard, and this had been the story of them. I think Arsenal had a very specific game plan, emotional feel to the Spurs game that meant they never sort of had to adapt to playing their way without Martin Odegaard. And this was almost attempt 1 at how do we play like Arsenal without the player that defines Arsenal. I think to an extent, Arsenal are just going to need to learn how to do that without Ødegaard and Nwaneri, because you couldn't play him at the Etihad, for instance. But I mean, it has to come sooner or later. Otherwise, you look at the Vieira loan, you look at the Smith Rowe sale, and the pair of them in a very different light if he's not willing to play Nwaneri, because that's why Arsenal have just cleared out their depth, Mikel.
Yeah. So I suppose in answer to John's question when he asked what Kid had done differently, if you did bring Ranieri in, that would have allowed you to play Havertz then as the out-and-out 9, and maybe that allows you to hold the ball up slightly better than they did with Jesus there, and that might bring the wingers into play more. So there was other options for him, but I did look at that lineup yesterday and thought it was probably the right lineup. So although there were other options, I'm not sure. I was looking at specifically afterwards, thinking Arteta got that selection on the lineup wrong.
Yeah,
I have to say. Scott asked about whether we're getting worried about the creativity on the ball. We can get through this week playing like souped up Sean Dyche's team.
Yes,
I'm happy, but just worried about the games after City and us trying to break a low block. I thought Trossard might be the answer in Odegaard's absence, but I think his passing has been shocking tonight. And in the Spurs game, I actually thought Trossard was quite lively when he came on yesterday. So we had a little bit of a different opinion on that. But yeah, I think it's really interesting, Scott, there pointing to it. And I'm so interested in those Southampton and Leicester games when Arsenal are at home, expected to win. They're going to come up against teams who are clearly going to sit deep and invite them on and see if they can break them down. Now, what Arsenal do in those two games, it's going to be so much. It's going to shed so much more light on how this period without Ødegaard is going to go, I think, rather than this week, which is always just a case of 3 incredibly difficult away games in the space of 7 days, missing players. It's just a case of getting through whatever way you can, just get through these away games. So if Arsenal draw against Man City on Sunday, I mean, I'm sure other people have different opinions. If Arsenal end this week with a win at Spurs and then draws at Atalanta and Manchester City, that is an incredibly good week in my opinion. And I know other people are going to have different opinion on that, but I think that's an incredibly good week, especially given the circumstances for Arsenal. But it's what they do after that when the fixtures turn around a little bit and it's a little bit more what you would describe as easy. I think it's going to be really interesting in Ødegaard's absence.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the souped up Sean Dyche team thing. Because I know, especially among people in the Arsenal community, I'm probably in the minority, but I have no problem with football that's played Sean Dyche way, a defensive way. And frankly, I think if Arsenal kind of want to grit, grind, and bore their way to a load of 2-0 victories in Martin Ødegaard's absence, and we end up looking at these games and it's sort of like, well, they had 15 shots and they weren't that great and the XG's way lower than in comparable games, but they gave nothing to the opposition. That's a way of winning a football match. And I appreciate that everyone wants to see the best, most silkiest football, and that's what Arsenal has been about for a generation. But you are old enough to remember when Arsenal were very much not about that, and it didn't matter if it was a team that were top of the table or a team that were 19th in the table. Arsenal were just going to defend better than them and trust their forward players would get 1 or 2 chances.
The only issue is there that Arsenal had Ian Wright at the other end. So when they did get those 1 or 2 chances, they tended to score them. And right now, maybe they're not. They're what I would give for an Ian Wright at the other end of the pitch this time. But I still celebrated those trophy wins just as much as I celebrated the glory Benge trophy wins with the scintillating football and the best players in the world. A trophy is a trophy at the end of the day. A win is a win, and I get exactly what you're saying on that. Just quickly on one more question before we move on to City. Charlie talks about Martinelli there, saying that patience is wearing thin, and he says next summer we should go all out for Leao or Williams if Martinelli's form doesn't turn round, which obviously we'll have to wait and see what does happen. But I think a lot of people are beginning to feel like this a little bit and thinking, where could Arsenal potentially improve the team next season? And that left wing spot, if Gabby can't turn it round, I mean, Leo's obviously is slightly older in terms of age profile. So you wouldn't say Leo's a long-term answer, and we'll have to see what happens with Saudi Arabia at the end of the season anyway, when it comes to Trossard. So when you look long-term, do you think Martinelli's kind of playing this season for not his Arsenal career? Maybe that's a little bit too sensationalist, but we've seen Arteta be very, very ruthless in the past with players who we've thought have been fairly safe at Arsenal. But if there's an area where he thinks they can improve, do you think left wing might well be one of the areas next summer that they look at?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I think Arsenal. I said all somewhere along, didn't I, that Arsenal are sort of maybe lacking that one transformative superstar or another transformative superstar in the front line to go with Saka. And it just doesn't quite look like Martinelli's going to be that. I think even if that doesn't transpire this season, even if it turns out that maybe 22-23 was the absolute best of Martinelli and that's not going to be the case most seasons, I don't think there would be any problem for anyone if he's sort of the third winger. If you use him to cover Saka and whoever is the new starting left winger, I think that would be fantastic. I don't think he's ever going to be so poor that won't be useful. But yeah, I mean, I do agree that it's a position where I think Arsenal have to be open to every possibility. Clearly, they were, because they went for Nico Williams.
They went for Mudryk for 80 million the year before as well.
I do think if some of those players rocked up at Arsenal, there may be a little bit of surprise. Even Leao, and I am a huge Rafa Leao fan, you might just sort of come to understand that this is what wingers and inside forwards are like. And we all remember, I was going to say Perez, but Perez is a bad example because he was always perfect. But we all remember our wingers from 15 years ago at whatever club we support. And we don't remember the 25 times a season where you just sort of thought, what are you doing, mate? And I think right now we're in a stage where we only remember with Martinelli the what are you doing, mate moments.
Yeah.
And everything else he does sort of seems to slip away from you. He's just in one of those moments. Nico Williams has those moments. Definitely not a finished article. Rafa Leao as well. It happens for all but the very, very, very best.
Yeah, it's probably tough for Martinelli. He's got Saka on the other side, who even when Saka doesn't perform that well, he still pops up with, the moment that either sets up a goal like we saw at Tottenham at the weekend with a wicked delivery, or he scores a goal himself. And I don't think that helps. Yeah, that you've got a goal or assist machine on the other side who can always produce, no matter how sort of off colour.
Plus, someone who can literally do no wrong in Arsenal fans' eyes, and rightly so. Like,
yeah.
But no one's going to blame. No one's going to say, "Oh, why didn't Saka get those opportunities?" Are they? And which I agree with.
Mm-hmm. So with kind of that in mind, what's your team for Sunday?
I think Martinelli? Probably the same team that played against Atalanta. High risk as that feels. I don't know what. No changes. I wish Arsenal were in a position to kind of know whether Calafiori is a better option for these sorts of games than Timber. Like, in my head, I think he might be, but I don't think if I were in Arteta's position, I would be saying, let's go Calafiori. He's shown me enough. It's just, exactly. Talk about a first start. And then you sort of start thinking up the pitch and you go, oh, maybe Trossard for Martinelli is the only one. But I think, I wish I knew what City's team was. I watched, did you watch Inter City?
No.
City Inter.
I saw some highlights.
Three of the games I've watched in the Champions League this week were pretty drab 0-0s. If City start Rico Lewis, then you have to have Martinelli, because Rico Lewis is trying to do the Trent Alexander-Arnold Zinchenko thing. He does it well, but it just means there's this chasm on the right side, and Akanji is not quick enough to cover that on his own against a Martinelli. If Kyle Walker starts for City, then I think maybe you go some sort of more Trossard, more technical. I think he will start Rico Lewis, Pep, because it seems like he's just very taken with Rico Lewis, and in that case, it's Martinelli for me. But Mikel used to work for Man City. Can you get on the blower and find out who you're expecting to start at right back? Because I think that really would dictate who I'd want to see on the left wing.
I mean, Arsenal need to. They cannot pass the ball as poorly as they did last night against Man City. They can't keep giving the ball away. Yes, City are going to dominate possession. We know that on Sunday. We know that Arsenal are going to do what they do well, and they're going to sit back and they're going to try and defend that goal. I don't think they're going to do things overly different to what we saw at the Etihad last season. I think it'll be a fairly similar performance from Arsenal. Hopefully they can actually get a goal at the other end one way or the other, but they've got to pass the ball better. They can't. They need to get a little bit more control in the game that they had yesterday. But how do you do that?
Would you swap out? Are you going to say Jorginho for Partey?
Yeah, I am. I thought Partey had a bad night last night. Not just a penalty decision, but again, I didn't think Partey had a great game. And I really like Thomas, and I think he's shown signs in a couple of games this season that he's been approaching some sort of towards his top form or close to it anyway. But I don't know. I was just watching that last night, and I was just thinking, does Jorginho just give you a little bit more control at the Etihad than Partey does at the moment? I don't know the answer to it as well. I'm asking the question, but I don't actually know the answer to it. I mean, I looked at those stats that I brought up in terms of the progressive passes and things like that, and Jorginho was sitting there with naught, and Thomas, at least had one to his name, and so I just don't know. It's just getting that midfield right at the moment. It just seems like such a conundrum to Mikel Arteta, and a really hard one to get the right answer to at the moment.
I feel like that maybe is also a position where we get a sense of what Arteta wants results wise. He will always say, and he will always play for the win. But I think if you want to sort of lessen your chances of losing, you bring in Jorginho and you play a bit more conservatively when you win the ball back, and you say, we'll take 5-6 passes, move our way up. If you want to be a bit more like Arsenal were against Spurs and play more on the counter and look to unlock Martinelli quickly, then that to me is the case for saying, we'll gamble that Partey might give the ball away much more frequently. His pass completion this season, it's actually not that bad, 85%, but he makes those line-breaking passes much more frequently than Jorginho. It's his first instinct. He's better at it than anyone else in the Arsenal squad. That's why I sort of move towards him, especially if the setup looks more 4-4-2-ish. And I've changed my mind on one thing. Trossard for Jesus. I've changed my mind on that, so he can come in the 11. And I think if it's that 4-4-2 style lineup where you have Trossard and Havertz drop deeper, and you're really looking for Martinelli and Saka as your quick outlets when you break through the line, I think you can get away with having Partey at the base of midfield because you have the second best defensive midfielder in the world next to him.
Yeah. No, I think I think I do sway towards Partey starting the game. I'm just kind of thinking in my head, you get a bit more control with Jorginho. But I don't think the positive of possibly playing Jorginho is enough, I think, there to take Partey. I actually really liked Partey against Tottenham, especially to Partey in the second half against Tottenham. I really like that performance from him when he just did seem to sit a little bit deeper. I thought Jorginho played very well against Tottenham as well anyway, and I know a lot of people disagreed with me, but I actually like that performance from Jorginho. But I thought Partey just sitting deep, getting the ball, moving it forward. I like that performance against Spurs. I didn't see enough of that yesterday, and he just looked like he was struggling a little bit, but he wasn't alone. I mean, everyone was struggling yesterday. It wasn't a good performance at all. But can you see Arsenal getting anything at the Etihad? Are you confident that they're going to get something there? I bet we'll be sitting next to each other again. We always tend to be sitting.
Yeah, we will. On the big away days, I think we may well be. No, I think City are going to win this.
You think City will win it? I
think they look really good. Actually, of late, there is something of every game I see, they are very vulnerable to the counter. Inter execute those counters incredibly well. They had sort of Mehdi Taremi was brilliant. I've never seen him as this sort of playmaking forward, but the ball stuck to him, and you sort of saw that, and you went, Kai Havertz could do that, and Trossard could, or Jesus could be the sort of Marcus Thuram floating around, and if you commit numbers on the break, yeah, you could do that. And then sort of by the end, Inter, who I think are a fantastic team, are just clinging on for dear life. There's nothing they can do to stop the crosses coming in. And I know that Arsenal are the best defensive team in the world. But I sounded very Clarkson when I said that, didn't I? That in the world. But, the ball's going to drop to Haaland once, or it's going to drop to Gundogan once. And I think that might be the difference.
Well,
what about you?
I don't know. I go back to last season. I think of those two games, how well Saliba and Gabriel snuffed out their threat. They're going to be absolutely. So I do think City have got a massive advantage in the fact they played on Wednesday night at home, and Arsenal were literally, Arsenal got home in the early hours last night. They're going to be travelling up tomorrow. There's just no time to prepare at all. It's just, I think that's such a huge advantage. I can't believe it was allowed to happen.
It's poor.
It just really baffles me that was allowed to happen. I can't, and I know Mikel's not using it as an excuse, and he's determined in front of the cameras to not use it as an excuse. He must be absolutely fuming about it behind the scenes. Yeah,
I thought it was. I'll agree with you on that. I moan about UEFA. I really like the idea of giving the Champions League its own week. Like they're going to give the Europa League its own week. Every other one of those competitions they managed to fit into 2 nights.
I don't see why it has to be over 3 nights. I just don't understand.
Yeah,
It's not every week. It's over 3 nights either. It's not every round.
only this week.
Which is what it's just stupid. It's like, why do that? And because you're always in. Whoever's playing on Thursday is it's such a disadvantage in their league at the weekend. It's just I just don't get it, especially. Surely when you're looking at the fixtures and you are mapping out, right, who's going to play on the Thursday in this first week, you do have a little bit of a glance at the fixture list for what that team has got coming up on the weekend. And you think, oh, look, Arsenal are away at Manchester City, probably the biggest game of the Premier League season. Oh, let's just play them on a Thursday night in Italy anyway. It's just not giving a crap at all about the club. I don't understand how that decision was allowed to be taken. I think it's such an advantage for Manchester City, and it might end up being the advantage that gives City the win this time because they are undoubtedly going to be fresher. Just undoubtedly. They haven't had to travel and they've had 24 hours extra to prepare for it. But look, hopefully we're not going to have to use that as an excuse and Arsenal can go there and get the result. But it's a tough ask, no doubt about it, at the end of an incredibly tough week for Arsenal.
Are you going to pick up one of their definitely maybe kits?
No, I'm not going to pick up one of that. I'm not going to be wearing that at Wembley. Did you get your Franz Ferdinand ticket, by the way? That's a big question.
I have got my Franz Ferdinand ticket. I got my 2 Franz Ferdinand tickets. Very excited for kids my age. I'd like to consider them our generation's oasis. I would be wrong if I said that, but I do love Franz Ferdinand.
I can't believe how easy that was for you to get tickets. Just sitting there chatting away, doing it, and you've got 2 tickets. A completely different experience to what I've had recently trying to get concert tickets. But congratulations, mate. Well done indeed. And I'm sure I'm going to see you on Sunday at the Emirates. Anything? Etihad, sorry, not the Etihad. Yeah, I won't be at the Emirates. You going to Bolton next week? So I reckon that Bolton game, we'll see you when Yeri start that Bolton game, won't we? Surely he'll start in that game. So that would be a good opportunity to look at him from the start to see how he can sort of dictate a game, albeit not against Premier League opposition. But I think that would be a really interesting one to look at in the team selection that Mikel goes for there.
No, I'm not. You can't do 2 EFL Cup games in a week, can you? And I really want to do Wimbledon, Newcastle.
That would be good.
Why wouldn't you? Because it's literally around the corner.
That would be good. That would be good. So I'll be at the Bolton game, and then the following week, Leicester, big day. My son's first Arsenal game. I'm taking him with me to Leicester. My dad's given up his ticket, so we transferred it to Luke, and it'll be his first game against Leicester. So God, I hope Arsenal win. I really hope you got to win.
Mikel, if you ever needed more encouragement to make sure you win in style.
He is devastated that Martin Odegaard's not going to be playing, though. Absolutely devastated.
Martin his favourite player?
No, Declan Rice is his favourite player. He's got Rice on the back of his shirt. He's had his own custom-made cap made when we were in Portugal at this stall with Rice. And then, was it 41?
Nice.
Rice's number?
41, yeah.
41, yeah, he's got that. So, no, Declan Rice is his favourite, but he loves Martin Odegaard as well. So, yeah, he's devastated. But look, that's plenty of time before we talk about Leicester yet. So thank you for joining me, mate. Thank you for watching, everyone. As per usual, obviously a little bit different this time around, doing an extended show in the morning, but I hope you've still enjoyed going over that and looking ahead to Manchester City. I'll be back tomorrow to do a normal show. We'll go through that more at length about what's going to happen at City. I'll do my predicted 11, I'm sure, as well. So thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for listening, James. Enjoy the rest of your Friday, mate. I will see you at the Etihad.
See you on Sunday.